Hello, everyone, and welcome again to another Teacher Joseph podcast. Today, we're going to look at the second conditional. That's the hypothetical one about what would happen if something else happened. Okay, it's made up of the past tense and the conditional would. Okay, so for example, if I went for a walk, I would see beautiful flowers. Okay, so you can hear I'm saying, well, if I went for a walk and I've no intention of doing so, I'm saying what I would see. So this conditional is not related to any point of time. You know, the zero conditional, the very fast one, is for things which are always true. If I cook, people die. That's probably quite an accurate description of my cooking there. With the fast conditional, it's things which are usually true. If I cook, people will die. Yeah, so that's for things which are usually true. I don't know why, but every time I make conditionals, they seem to be quite violent. I did well with that second one, though, didn't I? If I went for a walk, I would see flowers. Okay. So by the time we get to the second conditional, we've moved into hypothetical arguments. Not even argument, just about thinking what might happen, what could happen, what would happen. We can use modal verbs with the conditionals, but I'll leave that for another day because we want to focus in just on this second conditional. So we know it's hypothetical. It's used to talk about things which probably won't happen. Okay. So if there was an earthquake today, British people would suffer. So you can see the past tense, if there was. Some people say if there were earthquakes today, British people would suffer. Okay. Let's just go through a few more examples quickly, just to show you how random and hypothetical the second conditional is. If the aliens landed in the UK today, they probably would want to see Big Ben. Yeah. Another one might be, if I liked Celine Dion, people would be very surprised. Or if I said I liked Celine Dion, people would be very surprised, because, as I often say, there's only two things that I really dislike in the world, and Celine Dion is both of them. Really, I don't do Celine well, and that's because she destroyed at least one of my favorite songs. Anyway, back to the conditionals, yes. If I drank, past tense, lots of Coca-Cola, I would probably have indigestion. And these days with diabetes, I'm not allowed to eat anything, it seems. So if I, let me think of another one, past tense, of course. If I read the newspaper, I would be very depressed. Okay, so you can hear these things aren't really going to happen. If they were going to happen, I would say, if I read the newspaper today, I will be very depressed, but I've got no intention of reading it. I'm just saying what would happen if I did. I don't even have any newspapers in the house, so it's not going to happen. All right. So that's the setting for the second conditional. All right. It's all about hypothetical things, not something which is likely to happen. They can become a little bit more personal. If I were you, I would do that thing. But even then, even though you're giving advice, uh, you're not that person. So again, you're still speaking hypothetically. If the aliens came today, they would request a meeting with Bob Geldof. Now, I've no idea where I got that from, but anyway, you can hear there it's things which are not part of our experience and not close in time. All right? So, let's get to Beyonce. So, she says in her song, "If I were a boy." Now, she's using were. That's the only conditional which begins with the past tense. So she has no choice here except to use would. If she said, "If I am a boy, I will," but that doesn't make any sense for anybody talking about anything. So she says, "If I were a boy," or "if I was a boy, even just for a day, I'd," so I'd is a contraction of I would, "I'd roll out of bed in the morning." That just means she'd get up, okay? And then she goes on to say the other things that she would do. She's got a really weird, messed up view of men here. I mean, reading through the lyrics, she says that she would drink beer with the guys and chase after girls. Oh, really? She's obviously thought about this a lot, hasn't she? If I were a boy, I think I could understand how it feels to love a girl. Oh, really? Oh, interesting. Well, in this case, she's used could. As I mentioned before, well, I think I mentioned before, you can bring in modal verbs and use them in all of the conditionals. But we'll leave that for another day. So she says here, "If I were a boy, even just for a day, I would roll out of bed in the morning." And she's abbreviated that to I'd. Okay. Now, let's just think about that for a moment. And her conditional, "if I were," or she could have said "if I was." "If I were" seems to be more polite these days, but you can use either. Most people say "were" these days. I would get up from bed, or she says I'd roll out of bed. Okay, so her conditional is quite sound, quite healthy. Let's do another one, and this is one of my favorite songs. It's called "If I Had a Hammer" by Trini Lopez. Oh, I love that song. I don't really hear it often enough. I'm sure you'd know it. This is completely second conditional type stuff. Okay. He says, "If I had a hammer, I'd hammer out the morning." Now, again, he's saying what he would do. And it's quite clear because he's using the past tense of have in the possessive. If I had a hammer, so I know what's coming next. It has to be would. If I had a hammer, I'd, that's the contraction. So I would hammer out the morning. And then he says, I'd hammer out the evening. Oh, he's doing two things. All over this land. And then he says, I'd hammer out danger. I'd hammer out a woman. Interesting. I'd hammer out love between my brothers and my sisters. all over this land. Well, it was the 60s, I suppose. Peace and love and everything. By the way, hammer out is a phrasal verb which means to create. So he's talking about what he'd make. To hammer out something means to design something very specifically, because of course, hammer is a tool. So he's not really saying that he's, going to get a hammer and do something. He's talking about what he would make. Okay, and this song is by Trini Lopez. Wonderful song. Actually, Trini died a few years ago there. I was very sad to hear that. I love Trini Lopez. Okay, so he's saying if he had something, he would do something else. There's a lot of confusion with this because with the next conditionals, the possessive had sits next to the auxiliary verb. So it becomes if I had had a hammer. Yeah, it gets very confusing at that point, but that's not for today's podcast. That's for another day. So let's just stay with the second conditional. So then he goes on to say, if I had a bell, I'd ring it in the morning. Well, it's a bit nicer than a hammer, isn't it? And then he says, I'd ring it in the evening all over this land. I'd ring out danger. I'd ring out a warning. And he says, I'd ring out love between my brothers and my sisters. Again, I'm not quite sure really what he means by that. I'm sure he's being quite flamboyant with the words, but he's basically saying he would create love or ring a bell to create love, something like this. It doesn't really have a literal meaning. And then he goes on to say if he had a song, what he would sing. It's a great song if you want to practice your second conditional. The next one I'm going to choose is a Scottish singer. Now, this guy was in a group called Ultravox in the 80s. You might remember it. Ultravox sang a song called Vienna. Oh, Vienna. I'm not going to sing it. But anyway, he went solo. His name is Midge Ure. You can look at the transcript, but basically Midge, and his surname Ure. And his lyrics, he says, if I was a better man. And then he asks a question with the second conditional. He says, would fellow men take me to their hearts? It means, would other men let me get close to them? You know these singers, they're all very creative, aren't they? So they say things like this. And then he goes on to say, if I was a soldier, I'd lay before her captive arms. Now, I don't know what he means by that, but let's just think of his conditional because he's trying to make a nice one here. If I was a soldier, captive arms I'd lay before her. I'm assuming he's talking about guns because, we refer to weapons as arms. Unless he's talking about his own arms, but it's a bit of a strange thing to say, isn't it? That you'd lay arms before someone. You'd usually hug someone with them, wouldn't you? Anyway, he's trying hard with his conditional. So he says, if I was a sailor, 7 oceans I'd sail to her. Again, not the best lyrics, maybe, but creative people and everything. Yeah, so it's okay. He's saying, I would sail 7 oceans, but he's reversed the words. Interesting here, he says, if I was a wiser man, would other men reach out and touch me? Oh, perhaps he has some issues, maybe. And then he says, if I was a painter, I'd paint a world that couldn't taint her. That means I'd paint a world that couldn't damage her or make her look bad. Yeah, so some interesting words in here. If I was a poet, all my love and burning words, I would show it. And if I was her lover, her eyes in kisses I would cover. Yeah, well, he's not the best with the lyrics here, is he? But he's trying very hard. He's trying very hard. So, a lovely song and a great video clip as well from the 80s, if you want to have a look at that. So, that's two songs there, actually three, with conditionals. So, songs are great ways to practice conditionals. And you'll find loads of examples of them. For example, another one I remember is Bruno Mars singing "Count on Me," but he does the fast conditional with that, doesn't he? If you ever find yourself stuck in the middle of the sea, I will sail the world to find you. Oh, at least his lyrics are more original than the last one. Um, and again, he's using modal verbs. You can count on me like 1, 2, 3. I'll be there. Oh, lovely. He does his first conditional very well, doesn't he? So you can hear there that you can find songs for all the conditionals, okay? And maybe in the future we'll do some more. But I hope that gives you an example of the second conditional, which is always past tense and would. It can get a little bit confusing if you find a mixed conditional, because they sometimes, in very rare occasions, cause confusion with the second because of the presence of would. And I'm sure there are constructions where you could weave in the past tense to a mixed as well. But let's not worry about that. We can come back to that another day. Just enjoy the music for today. And yeah, remember, these conditionals are usually hypothetical. So Beyonce, if I were a boy, Midge Ure saying, if I was a stronger man, and Trini Lopez saying, if I had a hammer, where he's using metaphor. So, and what he would do, hammering out love between brothers and sisters and everything else. So this condition was used to really talk about things which aren't either going to happen or are unlikely to happen, but you can still dream about them, okay? And they're not usually so personal, except, of course, for the advice, if I were you, but even that is distant enough because you're just giving someone advice about what you would do. So by using the second conditional, you're actually keeping a distance there because it's purely hypothetical. Okay, that's it from me. So I hope you've enjoyed this. And yeah, please do listen to those songs. Beyonce, If I Was a Man, or If I Were a Boy, is it? Sorry, yes, If I Were a Boy, she says. And Midge Ure, If I Was. A lovely song, that, from the 80s. And the other one was If I Had a Hammer from Trini Lopez, which is one of these songs you hear again and again. He also did, was it One Caramera? One Caramera. I think that was Trini Lopez as well. I'm sure I have his album somewhere. Anyway, see you all. Bye.